Good afternoon and welcome to another Social Studies Lunch and Learn session. This is our fifth session of the year. My name is Wyndham Kemsley. I'm joined again by Eric Lozano, who is the secondary instruction and curriculum coordinator for the district. She'll take it away in just a little bit, but I've got a few housekeeping items that I'd like to go over before we get started. So if you're joining us live right now, we do have access to a chat function. So if you have any questions, we ask you to keep them related to the topic at hand so we can answer them in a timely manner. But if you do have questions, feel free to post them in the chat box. If you're watching this as part of the recording on our YouTube channel, you can utilize the links that are in the description, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in the presentation that's coming up. I also want to mention the Social Study Community Open House that's happening today, this afternoon, and this evening, where attendees will have the opportunity to have more of a hands-on review of some of the things that our adoption committee is considering utilizing for the 2023 and 24 school years and beyond. So we invite anybody who is interested in the content that will be used next year to come by and look at it. Again, hands-on. You'll have access to instructors and those who know exactly kind of what's going on to ask questions to. So Erica will talk about that a little bit more in her presentation. But we do want to make that known that is happening today. There are a few other times, so we invite you to stick around and hang out to see what times those are that are most applicable to your children, your students. And with that, I think we're ready to go. Erica, if you're ready, I'll pass the torch to you.
Sounds great. Thank you so much, Wyndham. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. I'm going to go ahead and present now so that you can see what we're working on today. All right, so as Wyndham said, this is part 5 of our Lunch and Learn series for this year. There are 7 parts total, so we're getting close to the end here, which is kind of crazy to think about. It feels like we've just begun this process. But today we're really going to start focusing on what comes next. So what does this look like beyond our adoption year? What does it look like to dive into instructional resources? And what does it look like to implement the new standards as we move into the 23-24 school year? If you have joined us before, you are familiar with the puzzle pieces in this presentation by now. But if you're new and this is your first time joining us, I always like to reiterate that we're all a part of the puzzle or a piece of the puzzle that supports our students. And you as parents or family members or members of our community are a huge piece of that puzzle. And so we're so glad you're here, and we thank you for all of the support that you provide and the partnership that you bring to the world of education as we serve your students here in Rio Rancho. If I haven't met you before, I'm Erica Lozano, and as Wyndham said, I'm the secondary coordinator for social studies and English language arts. A shorter way to say that is the humanities. I am the proud parent of a Rio Rancho Public Schools student, and I've got a preschooler who will be joining Rio Rancho Public Schools in a year and a half. And then I always like to share a little something kind of fun. And so this month, I wanted to mention that I am a lover of fun, lesser known facts about history. These are things that might help you if you are a contestant on Jeopardy! A few of my favorites are that peach ice cream was the first type of ice cream ever served in the White House. There's a connection to Martha Washington there. I also love the fact that Abraham Lincoln only signed his full name 7 times when he was president. And then kind of a fun fact that is always mind-blowing to me because we don't study these two historical figures at the same time in history, but Anne Frank and Martin Luther King Jr. were born in the same year, which always kind of baffles me because, like I said, we don't study them in the same unit when we're taking social studies classes. But they're about 6 months apart, both born in 1929. So just a couple fun facts, and if you're ever on Jeopardy! One day, I hope those help you. Just a recap of what we focused on last time. This is when we really started focusing on not just the the new standards that our state has adopted, but what it looks like to go through the process of adopting new instructional resources and what that process looks like in Rio Rancho Public Schools. Um, Really, the big takeaway from that session is that we do go through a very lengthy process, but the reason why is because we want to ensure that when we go to the Board of Education this April, we are saying these are the very best resources for all students that we serve in Rio Rancho Public Schools. So if you're curious about it, you can go back and look at the presentation. I'll give you a link at the end of this session so that you can go and look at that process, or as Wyndham mentioned, on our YouTube channel, the recording of February 8th session is available. So again, our purpose today is to preview the rollout of the new standards and instructional materials for the 23-24 school year. And we're going to take a look at what that looks like for students and staff. So before, we've talked a lot about kind of the why behind everything, and now we're going to look at the what. What does this look like as we move into the new year? First, we'll take a look at the rollout for staff, and then we're going to dive into what that rollout looks like for students. And then, as always, at the end, we will culminate our session today with opportunities to ask questions. As Wyndham mentioned, though, if you have questions at any point, please put them in the chat. Those appear on the screen to me, and I'll be able to respond to those in real time. So we'll start by kind of looking at what the rollout of the new standards and instructional materials looks like for staff next year. I want you to keep this in mind, though, as we look at next year and beyond. We talked about this at our last session, but the resources that we adopt starting the next school year are what we will use for the next 6 years. The length of time that we use the standards is not determined because we use them until something changes in statute, and there's not a certain amount of time right now, so we are planning to use them for the foreseeable future. So one thing that we thought a lot about this year as we were looking at rolling out the standards and the new resources next year is that while we are required to teach all new standards next year, we also want to chunk things over time so that we don't burn our staff out. Our teachers take on so much and they do so much for our students that we have to be really mindful, thoughtful, and intentional about how we roll out new learning and new professional development so that everybody has a chance to absorb, try things out, and get comfortable with any new learning in the classroom before we continue to move on with our 6-year plan. So we are going to review a little bit of what's coming immediately in the future for next year, but then I'll also give you a glimpse as to what's to come in the years that follow. First and foremost, as a former classroom teacher, I know that this is very true. What our teachers really want to know right now is, when can I get my hands on the new stuff? They want that teacher edition. They want to start digging in. They want to look at, hey, what do the units look like? How can I start my lesson planning? A lot of teachers, they like to take a good break over the summer, but many teachers also start diving in so that they can feel ahead of the game as they get started. So as our teachers leave for a break, they're going to have a few things. They'll have their guiding curriculum documents. So that includes a copy of their new standards, the pacing calendar, which tells them when units begin and end and when assessments happen, a year at a glance, which tells them what standards are covered in each unit, and then assessment blueprint so that they can look at what the expected learning is at the end of each unit and backwards plan from there. They're also going to get the teacher edition of their new textbook and online access to any instructional materials. When they return in the fall of 2023, they're going to get a little bit more. So that's when they'll be able to actually pick up in their hands the new student resources. Those take a little longer to come in, so those will be ready by the fall. And then also, we'll start rostering students to their online digital materials so that they can start customizing and getting ready to facilitate instruction through those online resources, in addition to engaging students in the print materials that we'll adopt for the next 6 years. We also have, and this is what I was referring to a couple slides ago. So this is the plan for professional learning in the immediate future and then also in the years to come. So for this, the remainder of this school year, all of our current social studies staff will engage in an introductory study to the new standards in April and May of this school year. When we come back, though, we know we always have new staff that we're welcoming onto our team, so we will do a repeat of that for any new teachers during new teacher orientation. And then in regards to the instructional shifts, and if you attended that session, then you might remember us talking about this way back in 2022. Or if not, the instructional shifts in a nutshell are kind of that bedrock or that foundation to everything that we do. They guide how we implement the standards, how we look at instructional resources. But there are 5 shifts total. And as we go into year 1 of implementation, our staff will be focusing on shift 3, which is integrating skills and content. So it's taking all of those facts that we know from history and then looking at them through the lens of a historical thinker or the lens of a historian. So that will be our focus next year. And then by the 25-26 school year, we will have engaged staff in professional learning on all 5 of the shifts. And then finally, next year, whenever there are new instructional materials that are adopted, usually the first year of implementation, we always have the opportunity to work directly with the publisher to engage staff in training specifically on those new resources. So that will be the other piece of our professional learning next year, is diving into how to use those online resources in a really meaningful way. So again, next year, our focus is dive into the standards, focus on integrating skills and content, learn how to use the new resources in a meaningful way with students. The other piece that I want you to know about in regards to what teachers can expect next year is more alignment coming through those foundational curriculum documents that I talked about a few slides ago. So right now, a lot of the items on this slide are already happening in classrooms, but they're not necessarily the same from one classroom to the next. And I want to note that having things be the same is not necessarily always our goal, but having aligned projects and assessments at certain points during the year is really critical because it allows us to make informed decisions about our instruction because we can look at data from a common assessment or a common rubric for all 6th grade students or all 12th grade students across the district, where we can look for trends that help to inform those decisions that we make for our students and for our staff. So that's one thing that's going to be a step in that direction next year, is that we will have some common projects. We will have common assessments across, so like I said, all 6th graders at one point during quarter 1 may take the exact same assessment during a 5-day window, and we'll analyze the data and make those decisions moving forward. The projects really are meant to be that meaningful, relevant, and rigorous opportunity for students to spark and sustain their learning over time. And that really goes back to one of the huge shifts with our new standards, which is to help students see themselves reflected in the standards that we're studying and the units of study, and then also make informed decisions based on what they've learned. So we're making some strides in that direction for next year. Before I move on to what students can expect for next year, I know that we do have many students at our high schools that are in AP courses. And when I was putting together today's presentation, I realized that we hadn't touched on the AP side of this process at all, but that has been a part of our adoption cycle this year. So whenever there is a subject that is up for review, if there are any related AP courses, those typically come alongside core. So I do want to let you know that we will be adopting new texts for all of our AP Social Studies courses, and they are listed there in that kind of coral colored box. And the way that we do that is a little bit different. We don't necessarily use a rubric for this process. Instead, we use what's called the Course at a Glance from College Board. And that is a document that provides an overview of everything that a student needs to study in order to be appropriately prepared for the AP exam. So we looked for resources that were most aligned to that Course at a Glance. And so it's more like an update to the current instructional materials that we have. And we're really excited about some of the updates that are happening. And we're very excited to have all of our resources really aligned to what College Board is expecting so that students are prepared for that exam in the spring. Before I move on to focusing on what this rollout will look like for students, are there any questions?
No questions at this point, Erica.
Okay, thank you so much, Wyndham. Again, if you have any questions, go ahead and post them in the chat. So just like we talked about at the beginning of what the rollout looks like for staff, our approach is the same for students. And we know that students can burn out too when we throw too many new things at them at once. So our committee really has put a lot of thought into the fact that students can burn out, and they really want to focus on chunking things along the way so that our students dive in, engage in this meaningful learning, and then we're able to build as we go from there. So here's a little bit of how our committee has thought about chunking things for students and really preparing them for that deep dive into the standards. First and foremost, our adoption committee this year decided that every single discipline within social studies would have an introductory unit. And in our documents, we call that Unit 0. And that really sets the stage for success for students for the year, or in the case of 9th and 12th grade, for the semester ahead. The purpose of these units is threefold. First, it's just to give teachers time to establish routines and procedures in the classroom. While sometimes I know for me, especially when I was a teacher, I would get a little apprehensive thinking about taking 3 days to establish routines and procedures. And I think that's 3 days where I don't get to teach my content. It's really critical, because if you don't have those routines and procedures established, then it makes it more difficult throughout the year to get students on the same page so that they can focus on learning instead of wondering what it is that they're expected to do. So giving teachers that time instead of asking them to try and do that and introduce new content is really critical to the success of our social studies classrooms. The introductory units also allow teachers to explicitly teach and practice historical thinking skills. So this is critical because that is truly the foundation of the new standards, as we want students to be analytical thinkers. We want them to think like historians, but especially at the middle school level, what does that mean? What does that look like? And so while we're establishing those routines and procedures, teachers are able to bring in that content of, hey, let's practice these routines and procedures and through the lens of historians. And then finally, the introductory units allow teachers to review critical foundational knowledge that serves as the basis for new learning throughout the year. One of the best examples I can give is when students enter 6th grade world history, understanding geography is a huge concept that's covered throughout the year. So any of those foundational geography skills that students need is something that can be reviewed during that Unit 0 or that introductory unit. So here are a couple examples. You'll notice some of the information is missing because we don't have our instructional calendar finalized yet for the 23-24 school year. So you'll notice that there aren't dates on there yet. But you'll see, for instance, in 8th grade, in Unit 0, the compelling question reads, how does historical thinking relate to becoming contributing members of society? So it's not related to any specific content, but they're really wanting students to think about, hey, as a historical thinker, like how does that relate to me becoming that contributing member of society? Why is it important to think like a historian in order to contribute to society? And then that question, why is it important to study history today? I think that's the question that's on all of our students' minds, and our new standards really help us to answer that. And then Unit 0 for 12th grade government is what are your roles and responsibilities as a citizen? It's really hard to study government if you don't have the answer to that question in your mind already, that you haven't grappled with that at the start of the year, so that as you learn about government in the complex way that it's taught in 12th grade, you're able to understand the connections back to what is my role and what is my responsibility as a member of this society contributing to this government. We also have a new exciting resource that is actually going to be available to students and members of the community, and those are called unit highlight presentations. So they're real short, quick, concise presentations that our curriculum committee is going to complete this summer. And that's going to be available. Teachers may post it to Google Classroom, they might send a link out, but this is a quick overview of what's to come, what is going to be studied for the next 2 weeks, 4 weeks, 6 weeks, semester. And so I'm going to give you an example of what that template looks like. It's not completed yet in terms of the content, but I want you to see kind of the format and what you can expect to see next year. So this is exactly what it will look like. It will start by providing a title of the unit and what dates it's being taught, along with the compelling question, so that question that really gets students engaged. It will also list what standards are being taught, as well as the learning targets. So those are the objectives that students will meet by the end of that unit of study. It'll have a description of how students will have an opportunity to demonstrate learning. So earlier when I talked about how there might be a unit assessment or there might be a common project that students are completing, this is where you'll see that listed here. So this might say, oh, students have to complete an infographic about the contributions of women during World War II, and they'll be taking a multiple choice quiz 3 weeks in. So the curriculum committee will list anything that's common here. Doesn't mean it's the only, that these are the only opportunities students have to demonstrate learning, but they are the common opportunities amongst all students at a particular grade level. And then this is where teachers can kind of come in and customize ways that they're engaging students in their class. So this is one slide where if you have a friend who has a student in the same grade at a different school, you might notice a difference from one slide to the next, because this is where that teacher creativity and autonomy comes in. And they may have different ways based on what they know about their students that they engage them in that learning. So this is where teachers get to come in and customize and give you a glimpse into the fun things that they have planned for their classroom. And that's it. And then the unit is ready to launch. So if next year you're ever wondering, hey, what is my child studying right now? You can reach out to the teacher and you can say, do you have the unit highlights? Can I see that? And they can either guide you to where they posted it, or they can send it your way, because these will be available for all classes and all units of study. And then finally, our curriculum committee has really been thoughtful this last year about making social studies meaningful for students. So again, this just goes back to some of the things that I've already mentioned. As we dive in, we know that the new standards are a lot, and we know that even grappling with how to break them down into learning targets is a big task that we have ahead of us. But we're always keeping in the forefront of our mind that whatever we do, we want to connect back to real life. We want students to see how what's happened in the past we can learn from and make applicable to today. And that comes from those real life projects and assignments, from asking really strong, compelling questions of students, and then including resources from diverse sources so that they are seeing multiple perspectives through the lens of history. So that is a recap of how we're going to roll this out with students for next year. As I mentioned earlier, the last piece of today's presentation or session is to discuss. So if you have any questions, please use that YouTube chat feature and let me know what questions you have about what we've discussed today or what's to come for next year. Okay, as I finish up, if something kind of surfaces and you want to ask, please feel free, and I'll catch it over here from what I can see from the chat. So, like I said, our sessions are coming to an end here soon. I feel like the content on this slide keeps getting less and less. But we do have session 6 coming up, which will be on April 12th, and that's where we will actually get online and dive into the instructional resources that are being recommended for students. And then in May, we will have an open Q&A session. So any and all questions that you have as pertaining or that pertain to the social studies adoption process, I am happy to answer them at that time for you. Just a reminder too, if you weren't here at the very beginning of the presentation, Wyndham mentioned that we have our community open house today. We do have sessions really mainly for our staff so that they have a little more wiggle room inside the boardroom where we'll be meeting, but we welcome you to come anytime today between 1:30 and 7. We'll just be closed for a half hour from 4:30 to 5 to kind of reset and get ready for the evening. But all of the materials are out, they're ready to go, and we'd love for you to come and peruse, ask questions. If you do come during the earlier sessions, so from 1:30 to 3 or 3 to 4:30, that's where you're likely to get to engage with some more of our staff. So we invite you to come. We'd love your questions. We'd love your feedback. And then if you aren't able to attend, we do have the digital resource that's available, and you can find that by going to our website, which is listed here on the last slide. And I'll put that back up in just a moment. And then as always, please join us next time. We'll be meeting on Wednesday, April 12th from 12 to 1, again, exploring those recommendations for instructional materials for next year. So thank you again so much for joining us today. It's always a pleasure to get to share updates with you and share information with you. And I really hope to see you next time. Thanks, everyone.